Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Field Advisor. It's end of October. Um, Harvest is wrapping up around here for many. I think many have. Oh, I won't put a lot of people in that category. Many. We are not done harvesting. Some are done harvesting. Some are doing fall field work. It's kind of every which way. So today I've got our soy envoys with me for one last time this growing season. Let's just go around. I kind of want to just do a free for all. Tell me any of other harvest updates you have that you want to share with our farmer audience. And then if you have any top griping concerns that you want to talk about from 2024 or anything that's coming into 2025 that you want farmers to keep top of mind, totally up to you. May have some follow-up questions. If anyone else has anything, feel free to start it up. So Eric, you want to start us off for us this morning?
Yeah, so kind of been my big takeaways this year, especially as we move into prepay season when a lot of, management decisions for next growing season are finalized. Really want to remind everybody that this year has really been a season about, or at least a lot of the areas that I operate in have been about the early season stressors. That's been the same for corn and soybeans, and a lot of the problems that I'm still seeing today on the farm that maybe where yields are off for some reason or another, a lot of it ties back to those early season stressors and how well did we manage those stressors. And it doesn't just have to be around planting. It could have been surface residue, the way tillage occurred, anything that impacted seed emergence, and then shortly thereafter. I'm seeing a lot of issues with stock quality for both corn and soybeans this year of just how well the plants are able to take up nutrients. And it just seems that if there was something that wasn't quite right this spring, it just snowballed, and unfortunately sometimes it got out of control and yields were in fact impacted. But on the flip side, we've seen some fantastic yields this year, and I think the guys that really did manage their fields, it rewarded them very well. If you're not planting soybeans in April, start planting soybeans in April. We've seen as much of a 20 bushel spread in much of the area that I operate in. And then weed control. I don't even know where to really begin there, but if you're thinking of just doing the same thing you did last year for weed control, it's time for some really serious gut changes for next year, just because it's going to take more management strategies, or it's going to take doing things differently to get a handle on some of these weed control issues. And we may never completely get to where we were at in, say, 1997 or 98 after the inception of Roundup Ready beans. This first kind of go around on some of this really bad weed resistant stuff. So with any of that, I guess those are kind of been my big takeaways, my kind of recommendations going into 2024. I'm sure I'll probably think of some more as we go through this podcast here this morning, kind of bounce off or feed off everybody else. It's kind of hard here to be in the first one sometimes, but those are my big takeaways.
Follow-up question to the early season stressors. Are those in farmer control, or is some of that just Mother Nature and you can't do anything about it?
Yes, all of the above.
So you just got to roll with what you can do, what's in your control. What can farmers do differently there?
Yeah, so I think, doing some things differently, thinking about, when you are making that trip across the field, what impacts am I maybe having on the ground? And I heard this saying, I've heard this saying 100 times, but for some reason I heard this saying this one time, I think it was towards the late summer, and it just seemed to stick with me. I actually heard it from Barry Fisher, and it's get to the root cause. And that has just really resonated with me the rest of the growing season. And when I go out to say a field complaint, it's all about getting to the root cause. And no pun intended, but a lot of times it is the roots or it's below ground. And if you're making a farm field visit or something, you better have a spade with you to figure out what's going on below the soil. I think too many times that's missed, what's going on below. And there are getting to be a lot of great technologies to handle those early season stressors. In a year, this year of tight budgets and everything, you've really got to look at the ROI on some of those on those type of products and make sure that they truly are going to provide return on investment that you're hoping for. But there are some great products out there to handle those early season stressors, whether it's with, a first great place to start would be some in the seed treatment space. Now, I wouldn't get too carried away with seed treatments and different add-ons, but there are some real merit to some advanced seed treatment packages beyond that standard F&I. And, really manage that, everything you can do with getting the planter set correctly, tillage, even thinking about tillage, how that tillage tool is set, or even this, I know harvest is getting wrapped up, but even thinking about residue management behind the combine, making sure we're getting that residue, that I've seen implications of that this spring affecting emergence. So there's just so many dynamics that goes into those early season stressors. And if they're not managed well, unfortunately, it seems like that can really throw some yields off that we've seen evidence this year.
Definitely. Thanks, Eric. Karen, I'm going to come over to you, and I want to ask you, Eric brought it up. I want to continue with it. Weed control. It starts now this fall. So what are you talking to farmers about when it comes to weed management, setting yourself up for 2025?
Just make sure that you know what your weeds are, because identification is the first step to making sure you can control them. If you have a combination of both giant ragweed, water hemp, possibly mare's tail, you can't use the same products to control all of those. You have to have a mixture to give you a broad spectrum control. So make sure you know what weeds you have, and then make sure the herbicides in your mix will cover that weed spectrum.
And to follow up on that, what are you looking back at 2024? I've joked with you before that says you have a tattoo on your forehead that says read the label. But beyond that, what are you telling farmers? Say, hey, you need to keep this top of mind going into 2025.
Well, the Endangered Species Act is going to have a big impact on what we can and can't spray, and where and when we can't spray it. So you're not just responsible for the label, but you're also responsible to go to the website. I forget what it's called now. I just lost it. Like 2 Live, which has
Bulletin
all of the
Live.
Bulletin Live. Yeah, but it has something with 2 in it also. But Bulletin Live maybe, or something to that effect. There was a blog about it that we wrote earlier in the season. It's too early in the morning. Sorry, I wasn't prepared. But you're also responsible for what is going on there. And then you have to make sure that you understand for your area what your Endangered Species Act implications might be. All of the herbicides are going to be coming under review, and they have to comply with the Endangered Species Act. And that's going to take some management in areas. So make sure that you're aware of all those things. And if you don't understand something, make sure you ask.
So on top of everything else, Endangered Species Act, there's a lot going on, that's for sure. Anything else you want to mention?
The blog, I think you said you're going to post next week. I've had a lot of, since we brought it up on the last podcast, I've had a lot of farmers bring up the fact that they did spray, at least spot spray in some areas late, and they are seeing major yield decreases from those. So, make sure you read the label. They're there for a reason. There are restrictions because not everything is herbicide resistant its entire life. Some things are only herbicide tolerant. I think Roundup Ready gave us a false sense of security. And unfortunately, that's not how the other products work. So read the label, follow the label. Don't shoot yourself in the foot by doing something that's causing you, 10, 15, 20 bushel yield loss.
Hey, Karen, I've got a quick question for you. When you were surveying the farmers and everything, did you happen to take a look or identify if there was anything else in the tank that could have been contributing, like was possibly related to adjuvants or anything like that? Or was it solely Liberty?
It was the ones I specifically talked to. It was late Liberty applications. So, who knows? It was Liberty and AMS, but who knows what else, could have come out of the tank in that time period. That's one thing that we're not very good at, is cleaning out our tanks. And there's certain chemicals that we use that are really great tank cleaners. And so that can have an effect also. So all things you need to keep in mind, but um, I know that, well, the farmers said that they suspected that that was the issue because several of them just spot sprayed, and exactly where they spot sprayed was where they had the issue. And they just didn't have the pods. So, or they had pods that were or not twisted, but kind of a little deformed looking and had no seeds. So
I posted
yeah,
that clip on TikTok last week, and there was a couple people that commented. They're like, "Oh, maybe my 90 bushels could have been 100 or something like that." And I just said, "Hey, don't shoot the messenger here. I mean, that's on your own doing, but something to be aware of." Yeah.
There were a lot of 55, 65, particularly the slightly later soybeans. So I know we had some tremendous yields in McLean County, but out from there, there were a lot of lower soybean yields that people maybe aren't really shouting out to the masses. But there were a lot that were 55 to 65 that really expected to be 70 and above.
I guess I'll add in too. I think, you know, it's not that you're going to get a yield ding every time with Liberty. And I think some farmers have gotten away with it, or maybe, you know, some people have, you know, said it'll be okay if you do it. It's just not going to be okay every time. I think it is growth stage dependent, and also stress, or I've heard different soil types, and I've heard different theories, but definitely I think that the problem was it was more so prevalent this year.
Well, and I think with soybeans, it's never one thing. It's always a combination of factors that just didn't line up to give the great yield. So, yeah, I think there was a lot of, and we didn't have rain like we normally would have in August and September. And, you know, that made a difference too.
Yeah. Definitely a wild year weather-wise, from going to lots of rain, excessive rain in some areas, and now facing drought conditions. And I want to get to you, Kelly, on the soil fertility side as we're going into field work. What's that looking like? I hear some people are having a hard time soil testing.
It's getting more and more difficult after the hurricane. We actually never pulled a sample until after the hurricane. We've been going as hard and as fast as we can, and it's starting to get more difficult daily as it dries out and gets harder. So there'll probably be a point in time here where we stop again, just because the samples we're getting are probably not going to be very good or representative. I already know that the majority of our potash tests are coming back low or significantly lower than they were 2 years ago, and a lot of that has to do with the dry weather and dry soil conditions. So it's getting difficult to get a soil sample pulled in a lot of areas, especially in those fields that were worked slightly on the wetter side and planted on the wetter side. Our automatic probes, we've been in some fields where the probes will lift the gators off the ground. So
a lot of dry fertilizer going on in your area, Kelly?
I would say half as much as normal. So there's a lot of guys that are still running fertilizer and running pretty steady as normal. Maybe at rates less than what they would have in the past, but they're putting fertilizer on. There's a lot of guys that have yet to start. There's still a belief or hope in the countryside that fertilizer prices are going to moderate and be cheaper by spring. So that's holding some guys up.
Eric, you're shaking your head no.
Yeah, I mean, we don't see prices correcting anytime soon. I think, fortunately, this may be the new norm for a while, just because you look at the stuff that happened with the hurricanes in Florida and then the world conflicts that are still continuing. I think some of these fertilizer prices are here to stay for a while, unfortunately.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but I think the other side of that is cash flow issues too. There's going to be a lot of crop insurance claims down here, especially on soybeans. the 6 to 8 weeks we went without rain, anything planted April, May, it pretty much is probably going to be a claim. The group threes were disastrous. I've heard of several yields with a 2 in front of it and a 3 in the front of it. There'll be some crop insurance claims on corn in some places as well where yields weren't as good. So the big thing on fertility though is that we're seeing a 30% or more increase in call for samples. So guys are actually taking inventory of what's there. We always see this in either drought years or years of high prices on fertilizer or commodity prices. So a definite increase in the amount of samples we're going to pull this year. And that's reflected in the laboratories. All the laboratories we send to are running well behind their daily capacity. So they're overwhelmed with samples right now.
Real quick, Kelly, how are double crop soybeans looking, yielding?
Double crops are coming in about average 45 or so, 50-ish. So I mean, a lot of the double crops are a lot better than the full season beans planted in May. So the hurricane saved the double crops.
Probably the only decent thing about that hurricane.
Yeah, pretty much.
Thanks, Kelly. Anything else you want to add going into 2025?
I think, the one thing that I thought a lot about this the last 2 or 3 days is, what have I learned from this year? And I try to always learn something. And I think the big thing we did was we didn't learn anything new, but we relearned a lot of things that maybe we forgot because we had a lot of good yields the last 3 years. One of my customers and I were talking about it that, his dad told him, he says, you always have a good year and sometimes you have 2 good years, but you never have 3 good years in a row. Well, guess what? This was year 4. And for them, it was a train wreck. And he kind of laughed and he said, it's easy to get used to growing 220 bushel corn on 140 APH. And you forget what 140 bushel corn is really like. And so that's, management though, back, the basics, the guys that managed everything, whether it was weed control, fertility, planting dates, management pays off. So you've got to ratchet up that management.
Thanks, Kelly. Shelby, let's come down to you. What things are you leaving in 2024 in hopes of a better 2025?
Yeah, good morning. Kind of follow up what Eric said, there were lots of the yields are off in some of these fields. And I think a lot of that leads back to the sins of the spring, as we like to call them, that guys did. There were a lot of things that occurred this spring that usually could be avoided, but this was a very difficult spring in our territory. It was wet this spring. So we worked in the windows of opportunity, and those windows of opportunity were not always very big. And we were, if you're doing tillage before planting, well, if you were planting when it was basically ideal or as close to ideal as we could get, that meant you were doing tillage a day or 2 ahead. It was probably not ideal. The soils were not ideal to be out there with tillage. So a lot of that is showing up. There's a lot of compaction issues, which led to then additional crown rot, phytophthora and different things like that, stock rots. That's what led to a lot of our stock rots, is because our roots were not very well established. They were stressed, and we had every stress possible thrown at this crop this season. We've had extremely wet situations, and then we went extremely dry, and then we were back and forth. So, and then we finished very dry. So those compaction layers then have not allowed that crop to finish. We haven't had a decent rain. I just looked up in September here in East Central Illinois, we had 1.5 inches. And in October, we've only had less than a tenth of rain. So we haven't had any rain to finish this crop out. We missed that hurricane this direction, both hurricanes up this direction. So we didn't get to finish. And so we really saw, if we would have caught some rains, we probably wouldn't have seen those yields be as drastic. But in a situation when I went out last week, I'm glad we caught the problem. I'm glad that the yields were down, that he found that problem, and we can try and fix it instead of turning around. We plant beans next spring, and next fall he's got 40 bushel soybeans. Well, what he did this spring is going to lead to that. If we don't try and get that fixed, there's going to be a problem. So, I mean, pay attention to your fields, and it may not be every field. It could be, just based on those planting dates, those planting windows. Usually it comes out what were those days to not be planting, that it's usually Mother's Day. But usually, there's those few days that were definitely not the best days to be planting. And those are probably going to line up with some of your fields that were lesser yields. So, all in all, I mean, we've wrapped up the year pretty decent. Corn yields overall were out of the ballpark, much better than anticipated, and very, very pleased. And since we didn't get the later rains, the bean yields from the fuller season soybeans really fell off, which is disappointing. It doesn't mean the varieties are bad, but we just didn't have the rains to fill. Since we missed those hurricane rains, we didn't get to finish those soybeans. And so there were I've heard a lot of 60 bushel soybeans in this territory just because we did not get the rains to finish those full season, but the early season beans did very, very well. So, pay attention as you're going through the fields, as you're doing things, kind of work through the process of when was your planting date? When did you do tillage? How did that yield end up where it is, and kind of work through that process and try and figure out what happened and what you can fix it as you're going into 2025. Let's not make those same mistakes. I mean, it's going to stay dry. We've got a long ways to go before we could ever get this soil profile back up to where we would need it for moisture wise. I hope we have a bad winter, because we need moisture at this point. I love snow. I know a lot of people don't, but I hope we get a lot of snow, because we need the moisture. And that's a good way to get it down in the soil and get these freeze thaw cycles to try and break up some compaction layers that were created, and try and help that along for next year.
I hear a lot of people say, be careful what you wish for.
Yes.
We got at least 24 inches of snow within a week last January. So I'm like,
sign me up. I like snow. I know most people don't, but
I don't mind the cold. If it could get cold, I don't really want another mild winter. I'd like to get some decent cold temperatures to kill some of this stuff off. So
agreed.
Thanks, Shelby. That was a great season summary. Drew, I'll hand it over to you. What's going on in your area? Oh, Stephanie, go ahead.
Shelby and others, did you see any yield loss with the aphids in corn?
Yes. We had, there was some specific hybrids that were very, very affected. And there were some other hybrids that had a little bit here or there. In our plot, which is always where we try and do a lot of comparisons and different things. I mean, off 60 bushel from the top hybrid to the hybrid that was affected the most by aphids. And then everything in there between. We had a couple that were off maybe 15 bushel, maybe 20, but definitely affected. I don't think guys were quite aware of what was going on at that point in time, or didn't notice it. Getting a few calls later that maybe the yields are off, you can kind of see a little bit of the effects in the residue. It's kind of hard to determine now at this point, of course, but definitely, yes, in our area, we had big effects from the aphids.
I talked to a grower yesterday that had a DeKalb variety that had corn aphid, and he said he had at least maybe 20 to 30 bushel loss on that.
Yeah.
So that was a good question. Good question, Stephanie.
It wasn't just DeKalb. I can verify that.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, I don't want to be anything specific, but I mean, there were enough hybrids out there that were affected across the spectrum, not just DeKalb. There were other companies as well.
Stephanie, you stole the entire thing I was going to talk about. No, just kidding. But that was going to be the main thing. No, because I completely reiterate everything that Eric and Shelby have said about the sins of the planter a little bit living with us all year long. That's where the vast majority of my late season calls have come from. Something to think about that is kind of unique. I am noticing that beans that had sidewall compaction, and we talked about this a lot, but the branches just are not staying on them. So I know that kind of maybe reflects some other third-party research too that's been going on, but that's been something really cool to see. Not for the grower, but for someone who's trying to figure out problems, it's been really kind of fun to look at. But I would say the last 2 weeks or so, the aphids conversation has been really big in my area. We've probably, I would say, about a 10 to 15% yield loss in affected hybrids. My biggest thing that I'm talking through is on many operations, the hybrids that were affected are the ones that were the highest yielding for them in 2023. And one of the best late season attackiveness. We really are correlating. It seems like the hybrids that have the best late season attackiveness, best late season plant health, are the ones that they were somehow able to target, which is kind of incredible to me also, that an aphid was able to tell the difference in that plant structure somehow that early on. But just think back. I know right now it's kind of emotional. It's very easy to say, I'm never planting that again. I'm never looking at that again. But there's a lot of very high yielding products that are getting affected and ones that we don't want to miss out on going into 2025. So just because we're even having that conversation on the product advancement side is, okay, how many of these we're looking at what we call our choice trial data, very similar to impact, basically our pre-commercial trials. How affected were a lot of these different hybrids, and should this hold one back, or should we still advance it because we know the multi-year data is really, really good. So that's probably been the biggest conversation. Yields overall have been excellent. One thing I would mention is a little bit more variable than last year. So I've heard of several operations who've had their highest bean yields on record, but corn has still been a little bit more variable in 2024 than it was in 2023.
Drew, heading into 2025, anything else you want to keep on growers top of mind?
Yeah, so probably one of the last things, I'm actually waiting to get a rain. I think there's a 100% chance of rain now through northern Illinois tonight, which we could desperately need. But we are going out and going to start our fall soybean cyst sampling. So we basically go through, sample all of our variety plots, and then compare that back to stressors, or maybe there was a difference in Peking versus PA88788. If you have a field that was stressed out now of soybeans that you just can't ever seem to get a good yield on, even if it's corn going into beans for 25, if it was coming out of beans in 24, that's now is actually a really, really good time to at least see about that answer. I think sometimes we've put so much emphasis on cyst, it's almost getting an unfair blame in some cases, but it's now the time to actually get a number, get a cyst count, and see what's going on. Because there is a lot of new technologies with GM Snap 02, Nemosphere that we're going to be talking about here in a few years. So we need to be ready to kind of place that and think about.
Just a quick plug, Illinois Soybean Association is funding free soybean cyst nematode testing again this year. If you go to fieldadvisor.org and under the participate tab, you'll see free SCN testing. So thanks, Drew. Craig, in the breeding world, I imagine data's not wrapped up yet, data collection.
For the most
Are
part
you there?
around here it is. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
good deal.
So breeding pushes a little quicker than most. So most of our advancements are done for this area or this RM. So the next step is deployment. So taking the stuff that goes out of, it's made it through the multi-year testing, and it's last year in breeding, and then we transition it over to present it to the commercial teams, and then they see what they've got in their lineup and see where it fits. And if it doesn't, it may drop out, or it finds a home. So that's kind of the next step. The only thing I would add on that I hadn't really thought about much, but it was something that I learned this year, is some of those hybrids that have been out for a few years and they're doing well. People will push them further than they've been maybe tested or were designed to go. And so I would just caution, if you're pushing your maturity ranges just because it's done well for a neighbor that to the south or to the north, don't expect it to be the best like what your neighbor experienced, because you're pushing it out of its best area that it was designed to be in. So probably more of a north and south type of thing than an east-west, but that's something that we've kind of learned over the years is, you know, some of those later RM hybrids that have done really well for the south, they may or may not go north well. So that's just something to think about. The other thing I would say is, you know, I think it's already been mentioned here, but don't hang everything on this one year. You know, like was mentioned, this spring was pretty variable. Everything was, you know, there was a lot going on, a lot of variables for one year. So think about multi-year and then start dabbling in with the new stuff that you know, spread your risk that way.
It's a very good reminder. Every year is different. I think we're reminded of that every single year, that not one year is the same.
And everybody has a worst field. So
yeah, definitely. Craig, anything else going into 2025 that you want farmers to keep on top of mind?
Well, I think everything else that I was thinking of has already been hit on. So I don't know that we need to rehash most of that stuff. All the variability and the dryness. Those are my big concerns.
Big concerns to just keep thinking about. And with that,
there's nothing you can do about it, though. I guess is the other thing is try not to worry, but prepare yourself.
Prepare yourself. Some things are out of your control, like we said earlier. Mother Nature, you can't go up against her, but you can try to control the things in your own control. Keyword try. Thanks, Craig. Appreciate your input. And Stephanie, not to round out with you, but I saved the best for last, right?
Thanks, Kelsey. You're going to do really well in your evaluation in a week or so.
It's recording.
I'm teasing. No, I would just say, I think to reiterate, this was definitely the year of different planting dates, which is very abnormal, especially in my area. And then because of the different planting dates and certain hybrids, we had some pests that we don't normally usually have. And so, and also some diseases issues. I think overall that would be my take on things. And I think what's on top of mind for farmers is a lot of people don't have anywhere to take their corn. That's an issue. Storage right now. Everybody's full. I've seen so many pictures of bins overflowing. It makes me nervous wreck. And of course the fires and the dryness. And I think, you know, normally within hydrous ammonia and application, we think about it not, you know, being too warm to apply. And, you know, to an extent it was, but this is too dry to apply. So farmers were thinking about, gosh, am I going to be able to have time to do it in the spring? And is it going to be more expensive in the spring? So I think those are on top of mind. And to go along with, you know, we definitely were affected, and it really sucked because we rounded out the year with our mid-May planted corn that was a hybrid, you know, and yes, aphids did go after certain hybrids that were affected. So that's how we ended. And gosh, you guys, you know, you keep saying that I'm not supposed to, you know, judge this hybrid by this year, but you don't have my mom and my dad and my brother, you know, saying this is your favorite hybrid. It used to be your favorite hybrid, and it's not yielding at all worth a crap as we round up the season, especially compared to some of that earlier planted corn, which we also had the conversation about. You know, this is mid-May planted corn. We're not used to that. We're used to planting in April. So just some other conversations I think a lot of people are having with hybrid selection going into next year. And with variety selection for soybeans, I think, you know, we're going to stick to what we know. I don't think we're going to try anything new. And I think we're going to spread our risk a little bit with some different maturities going into the next year. And just trying to make sure we have good disease tolerance on some of those beans, on things that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, Stephanie, I know a lot of people had Phytophthora issues this year, and we talked about, you know, looking at 2025, That's where it starts, is some of that seed selection. So taking a look at what problems you had this year. Did it attribute maybe to the seed or not? That's a lot of different factors, and we've talked that over today. But really reflect on what some of your issues were this year.
And to add on that, I just had an agronomist call me not too long ago. And I mean, the problem you're running into with Phytophthora is, you know, you will go and look at your seed selection guide and it says I have great Phytophthora. And now what we're finding is that soybean may not, you know, you may have Phytophthora in your field that has overcome that gene or tolerance. I guess it would be gene, sorry. Within that soybean. And so I'm getting a lot of complaints about that. So something to keep the plant pathologist busy the next couple of years to try to help work on.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephanie. I think that'll round us up for today. This is our last Soy Envoy podcast episode of this year. For everyone that's listening, I told them this before we started recording, but I just want to say it again. Thank you for putting your time and effort into these episodes this year. Your insights, perspective, sometimes we may have disagreed, sometimes we have agreed, but I think that's what makes an excellent conversation, and for farmers to hear different sides and different perspectives, because we all know there's a different side to everything, and we all have different perspectives depending on what our background is, where we work, what we do. So I appreciate these conversations. So thank you all. And this isn't the end of the podcast this year. We'll have some more episodes here coming out soon. But for now, we'll wrap it up with harvest. Stay safe out there, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.